It's Tuesday, March 12th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today we are digging into a child poverty report card. We will talk about current rates, how we got to where we are, and how things vary depending on who you are and where you live. Plus, we're going to talk about solutions. And I've got a bunch of folks lined up who were involved with putting together that recent report card on child poverty for Newfoundland and Labrador. It looks at how money, or the lack of it, is distributed within our population across race, geography, and family composition. I stole that line straight out of the report. A word that stands out to me looking through it is inequality. This in a province that has long talked about haves and have-nots, but not necessarily in a local way, in a way looking at Newfoundland and Labrador and our communities and the folks who live in them, specifically children. In the next hour, you will hear the details of the report card, plus a focus on lived experience and regional perspectives. Joining me in the studio, we have Lindsay Hines, Manager, Community Vitality, Community Sector Council NL. Welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Haley Poudan, Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group. Hi, Haley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Nivi Mahendran, Project Officer, Impact Measurement and Engagement with Choices for Youth. Hi.
Hi.
And also Neria Elwood, Executive Director of the Jimmy Pratt Foundation. Hi.
Hi.
So a couple of folks who are used to the show, a couple of folks who are new to the show. Thank you all for coming in. Let's start then. What is the reality of child poverty in this province? And I'll go from my right all the way to my left, and I'll probably do it the other way next time. But Neria, why don't you kick on off?
Yeah, I think that I'll give the high-level summary of where we're at. And so we're looking at data from the year 2021. That's a two-year lag because we're looking at Statistics Canada data. And the data that we use comes from tax filers. So that's over 99% of people in Newfoundland and Labrador file taxes, which is great. So the data set that we're looking at is really comprehensive. We're looking at tax filer data from the year 2021. So just to bring us back there, that was the year after the pandemic. The pandemic was declared. A lot of the pandemic benefits, the emergency benefits like the CERB, the Canada Child Benefit top-up that came during the early days of the pandemic, all those things are starting to expire. People are starting to see those things clawed back. And at the same time, inflation is up. The cost of living is up. We're starting to see a serious housing crunch. We had one before, but we're starting to see that intensify. And so that's the context in which families were living in 2021. And child poverty did go up between 2020 and 2021. We had the lowest rates of child poverty in over a decade, maybe ever in Newfoundland and Labrador the first year of the pandemic because of those pandemic transfers. And then we just see them start to creep back up at 18% in Newfoundland and Labrador in 2021.
Nivi, same question for everyone, but what is the reality of child poverty in this province?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that poverty isn't just a financial issue. So people are experiencing poverty impacting them on many different directions. So for a lot of the youth that we work with, it's food costing more. It's not being able to get from one place to the next, so that impacting their employment. So when we were, consulting with communities across the island, transportation was a really big barrier. And we're hearing that not just in Stephenville or St. John's, but also in Labrador. So it's that holistic view. So the social determinants of health. Poverty isn't just money, it's all of these things are impacting people's well-being.
Haley, what about yourself?
My perspective is as a parent and as through testimonies I've heard my daughter give me, child poverty, the children are aware of the poverty. The children are feeling it. And if you don't specifically sit down and talk with them about what it is or what it means, or if you hide it, they still have the mental and emotional impacts to them. And I grew up with child poverty myself, so I can speak to how much it hurts and you feel powerless. And then if you're talking with your peer group, as the testimonies through my daughter, they're very aware that it exists. They're very aware when their stomach hurts and there's no food, or they're aware that their parents experience a systemic barrier from a front-end service provider in some cases where, that compromises the confidence to even outreach for help. So the children are not just, the statistic, but there's a living consequence to this in the future.
Yeah, and it's such an important point to think about, right? When we talk about reports and numbers and statistics, right? Behind each one of these things that we're talking about, it's a family, it's a child or children, and these are real people across Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're going to be hearing about that through this discussion here on the Signal today. Lindsay, what about yourself? And it's that same question, right? Like, and everyone's going to have a different, like, it could be the report answer or any number of answers from like the lenses that we're bringing to this. But what is the reality of child poverty in this province?
So I think what we heard when we consulted organizations during this report card was that there's a lot of new poverty. So people are no longer servicing their typical client. Like, they would probably know the family for generations, and they've seen the same type of people. But since the pandemic and with poverty on the rise, they are seeing a lot of new poverty, so not their typical client. First time people using food banks and school lunch programs being accessed more than ever. And also what we heard was how different poverty looks in different regions of our province.
Yeah, it depends on, so it can depend who you are and where you're living. And again, we've got a couple of folks lined up to talk to, which including a Labrador perspective. And there's a bunch of perspectives, obviously, within Labrador for this show today. I also want to touch on, like, our backstories, right? Why we're here today and who we are. Lindsay, we'll go with you on this first, though, because relatively new role with the Community Sector Council. Just remind us about the role and just and how you came to be part of this whole process.
Sure. So I'm the manager of Community Vitality, which includes poverty reduction and well-being in our province. We are a province-wide organization at the Community Sector Council. So we exist to help those who help others. Yeah. So we're really about increasing capacity in the community sector. So our role in this was convening organizations across our province to really hear their stories and what they wanted recorded in this report to add some context to the data. Because data can often look a certain way, but you really need to hear the stories of people with lived experience. And so what we did was we brought together those organizations, and thankfully we had great engagement in different regions of the province. So what we heard was the stories of their clients, and those organizations spoke on their behalf. And I think that added a lot of value. Those stories have really resonated with the report card writers and myself as CSC.
It was a few dozen organizations or something. What was the number?
Over 40.
Yeah.
Over 40.
So we did an in-person consultation out in the West Coast, and we did some virtual consultations as well, and we completed a survey with organizations who service those people who experience poverty. And we really, the data is really powerful, but when you really hear those stories and hearing, say, an organization that typically serves, snacks in school, and to hear that, these brand new families that have never accessed these services that are coming in, it really amplifies the need for this report, that organizations can now use this report, we hope, as a tool in their advocacy.
Yeah, it's a talking point, right? You bring it out, you're like, hey, we got some smart folks looking into this, and here's what they found out, and here's what all these different groups have been saying, right? Yeah. And here's folks with lived experience talking about what they've been through. So for you, as Lindsay Hines, then, what's this process like for you, for the learning that you do? Because I always find, for me personally, in this show, when I do shows like this, I learn a lot. It's impactful. It changes me as a person. What's it been like for you?
So prior to working at CSC, I did work frontline for over 20 years in a community center here in the metro region. So while I had a lot of frontline experience working with folks who experience poverty, it was a really different perspective for me as a person and as a person navigating my career. So while I was normally working navigating services for people, now I'm hearing the other issues, like the capacity issues within organizations, or and also very fortunate, we actually have been doing some convening of the actual folks with lived expertise. So hearing those stories and the changes that have happened from when I was frontline, so it's gotten even more of a struggle for people who are doing that work. And most people who work in the sector, who work frontline with people like that, they're very dedicated humans. They're in it to help people, truly. And then to hear that people are still facing barriers to get services for folks in need really pulls at the heartstrings. And my view has really changed. And also seeing the organizations really rally together is very powerful towards this issue.
Haley, what about yourself for coming in here and the involvement that you've had with everything?
Well, I moved here to Newfoundland in 2019. Back in Brampton, Ontario, I was a community development outreach worker, and I was a former volunteer member for the Homelessness Partnering Strategy Community Advisory Board in the Peel region. So when I moved here, I saw a disparity. I saw that there was movement from like relative poverty to absolute poverty, and I could not believe it. I was like thrown back in time. I was thrown back through like all of my different academic learnings, and going to college twice, going to university twice, graduating all 4 times with honors, but growing up with poverty, I don't have the confidence. I still don't have the tools. I still don't have the networking because it was a new province. So it's like you're trying to find resources, but not having the way to navigate the system, or not having someone to ask. So I became very isolated, and then of course the pandemic, so that made it extra hard. So it was just kind of like, here I am as just a normal citizen with my daughter experiencing economic hardship because family situations had changed, finances had drastically changed, and trying to then be that parent to get that help, to get that advocacy, to find the next public resource. And being in a more rural community, it sounds great, the capital city has so many resources, but with my perspective from being in Ontario, the mainlander discrimination was there. There was the racial discrimination sometimes. So it's kind of like I saw a lot of wiggle room or areas for improvement. So with all of my academic and lived experience, I just said, I have to do something. So it's like I'm an advocate, I'm an ally, and me and my daughter have been partnering together with youth initiatives so she can apply for grants and then partner with organizations to, even though it might be seed funding, but to at least start a grassroots movement amongst the youth population so they can feel empowered to know that they can have an influence and impact positive change in society.
Thank you for that. Nivi, yourself?
Yeah, nice to meet a fellow Ontarian. I also moved to Newfoundland 2 years ago for similar reasons, to bring my family closer together. Costs are rising, but it was also an opportunity to work with a wonderful organization, Choices for Youth. I've been a youth member who availed of resources from youth-serving organizations, so this was a perfect opportunity. And through my role, I help work with youth who are previous members of Choices for Youth programming or current members, and we help advocate on youth-related issues in the province. And child and youth poverty is a huge one, and a lot of our youth members have worked on adjacent issues, like I mentioned, food security. And, what we're hearing is a lot of these youth want to do things and they want to explore opportunities, but there's a lot of things holding them back, like those financial barriers. Despite being on income support, there are things that they can't do. And so part of working on this report was to look at the data and also add the kind of narrative piece to it, like what are people actually experiencing, but then also the solutions that we want to talk about later that could be applied on government level, but also supporting nonprofit organizations.
Naria?
Yeah, I'm with the Jimmy Pratt Foundation, and we're different. We're quite different from Choices, I think, in good ways and more in ways that pose a challenge for this kind of work. So we are not a frontline organization. We don't directly serve families living in poverty. But our mandate is to help every child in Newfoundland and Labrador to be the person they were born to be, even in the face of adverse circumstances. And our way of doing that has been on advocating for better public services. Those are, through public services, we can reach every child in this province.
We've done shows on childcare before.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of where most people know me from. Most of our work is on childcare and early childhood education, because we find that that's kind of a system that's pretty lacking in this province. And it's a way that we can start to redress some of these inequities. But this project of working on the Child Poverty Report Card, we came to it through the national organization Campaign 2000. They kind of reached out to us and asked if we wanted to be involved. And we thought this was an amazing opportunity because, where we're not always connected to frontline organizations, because we are focused on policy and on research and on advocacy, which is really important. A lot of frontline organizations, are so strapped for time and for cash that they don't have time to do that kind of work. But, I think that for us, it really grounds us in the realities of what life is like in this province and within this province.
Can I get a timeline? If we're talking for context, right? We're talking about context here today, and I'm just because I think is it 2006, right? The Williams government poverty reduction strategy, first one. But even before that, so who with the report is the best to talk about this?
I think maybe, yeah. I think I wrote the section, so
Okay, so you're the person. There you go.
I guess I'm responsible for it, of course, with the help of others. But I'll take the responsibility for the failures of it. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a mixed history of dealing with poverty, and like you said, there's a lot of we talk about the haves and the have-nots quite frequently, but often we think of that more in relation to us versus the rest of Canada. We don't think about that in terms of what's it like as a person in this province, and that the experience of different people in this province is really profoundly different. So we have a mixed record of dealing with those kinds of things. And I think 2006 was a big year. The Williams government introduced the poverty reduction strategy. And that was actually quite successful in this province. It was a dedicated strategy to reduce poverty. And that was during kind of the oil boom years. Things in general were kind of good in Newfoundland and Labrador. And in 2016, that program lapsed. And so that kind of coincided with economic hardship in the province, but also a reduced focus from the provincial government on reducing poverty. And I think that, it's hard to say why that is. Now we're seeing a renewed focus. The provincial government brought in some child poverty specific measures in the fall, which were really promising. We're seeing the social and economic well-being plan come down the pipeline. And also the health accord. All of these have a big focus on poverty. But I think that in the course of those years that we weren't really focusing on poverty, child poverty actually went up in the province. We were that was against the national trend. In 2016, we were going up. Everyone else was going down, because that was when the Canada Child Benefit was introduced. And I think that what that speaks to is, without a provincial focus, in addition to a federal focus on making life more affordable for families, but also supporting families in poverty, child poverty goes up. And, I think that we can see through this history of kind of up and down rates of child poverty and up and down focus on child poverty, that actually poverty is a choice. The level of, not for people, but for governments.
When we talk about policy, right? Because it's how much or what's the budget for spending on such and such a thing in terms of income assistance, in terms of these types of supports, and there is a choice for how much money gets put into things. Absolutely.
And, I think that we've seen a shift of focus towards individual families. What are you as a family doing to get yourself out of poverty? When actually it's a systemic issue. Anyone working in the sector can tell you that. And you actually need governments who recognize what the barriers are to people living a dignified life and actually addressing those. There's a statement that, that states like ours, that are wealthy nations, we effectively choose our level of poverty by how much we redistribute towards folks who have less.
We've got Sharon Williston on the line, Executive Director, Bay St. George Status of Women Council. Hi, Sharon.
Good afternoon.
Tell us about your region, your area, and child poverty, and where things stack up with respect to this report card, and just what you see in your position.
So when Nira reached out to us back in the fall regarding the report card, we weren't surprised, but we were surprised in regards to how we were against the provincial average. So in regards to the Bay St. George area, children living in poverty is almost double the percentage that we see for our province. So we're hovering around 31%.
31%.
31% of children are living in poverty in the Bay St. George area. So we took a look at some numbers, and these are based upon numbers that were available to us back in November. So just to put some context to this. So childcare, as most areas, especially with rural areas, is very difficult to come across affordable, reliable childcare. And as a result, we have many households that have to depend upon income support. So income support in our area, regardless if they have one child or they have 10 children or more, they're receiving the same amount. So they would receive a maximum of $1,312. And that breaks down to $522 for rent, $719 for maintaining the household, and $71 for heat and lights. The average rent here in Bay St. George, I was talking to our housing support worker regarding this, a two-bedroom averages for between $800 to $1,100 a month for rent, plus utilities. If you're looking at a three-bedroom, you're looking at $1,000 to $1,400. The number of units that are available through Newfoundland and Labrador housing are very limited, and their wait list is very, very long. Then we look at transportation. Transportation within the Steenville area, if you're going out to do your grocery shopping, a taxi is going to cost you $9 one way. There's no public busing system here. If you're living outside of the Steenville area, I'll give you 2 examples, Adam. The first one is if you were living out in the Lords area and you were coming in to do your grocery shopping, for a taxi one way, it's costing you $73. If you're living in the Robinson area, to come in to do your grocery shopping is $89. So the numbers to us were not surprising.
No.
We know from the calls and the drop-ins that we're seeing at the Women's Center, we are very fortunate that in the Bay St. George area, there's a lot of collaboration between the not-for-profit organizations that basically we do our very best. Like the Women's Center can do one thing, another organization may be able to help in another way, another one another way to try to meet the needs. But we're running on very limited budgets. And we're seeing, repeat folks coming in every month because they don't have enough to live each month. They're merely surviving.
So when you talk to when you talk to folks with the provincial government or a federal representative for the government, what's the response when you talk about this with different levels of government?
It's under review.
Okay.
That's usually the what we get back. I have heard through the grapevine that there's some hope and some changes being made to income support in the near future. Hopefully we'll see that this year. But a lot of that will have to do with more so for folks that would be, let's say if I had a grown daughter and I'm on income support, my daughter wanted to still remain living with me. Instead of receiving the comfort allowance, she may be able to receive more, just as an example of the changes that may be coming.
Any other thoughts on region-specific changes that would really help for folks in your area around Bay St. George?
I think that when we're looking at accessibility, so the transportation is a huge issue because even for folks to come in to be able to take part in programming. So we have some beautiful programs that's ran through the Women's Center and also through the Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network, the People of Dawn Indigenous Friendship Center, Community Education Network, Family Resource Centers, and so on. But folks don't have the transportation to get in. That's first and foremost, because if they have a connection, then we can start working on their individual needs. But they need to have that piece of transportation put in place, affordable transportation.
All right, Sharon, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show to share the reality of Bay St. George and what you're seeing there and for talking about some potential solutions. And there you go. It's that word transportation again. I'm hearing it a lot from a lot of folks these days when I'm doing this show, talking about the cost of living across Newfoundland and Labrador. And today it's through child poverty lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. All the best.
Sharon Williston there, Executive Director, Bay St. George, Status of Women Council. All right, for the folks here in the room, does any of what Sharon was saying there jump out to you? Go for it.
Yeah, I think that what she's highlighting there, that urban-rural divide, is that, when we're offering solutions to child poverty, a lot of the time the rural-specific needs are overlooked or they are different. It's not that all rural places are the same, which is what we learned when we were speaking to Bay St. George area, Nunatsiavut, Marystown. They all are different, and so there isn't like a single solution, like a Band-Aid solution that you can apply to them. But at the same time, sometimes a Band-Aid solution might even be a better step than nothing. Yeah,
because I find a lot of times they can be like, we're talking about Metrobus. But it's like, well, hold on now. Newfoundland and Labrador, big old province with a lot of different communities. And just because, yes, folks talk about in town, as we say, needing transportation, well, just as we heard, right? But and it depends on the community and the area and the region for how that could work, too, for
Absolutely.
a solution.
And I think to that transportation point, we heard in Nain that they, somebody came and told us in Nain, they need transportation. They're like, it's really, obviously, it's so cold in the winter. Not everyone has a quad to get around. And they've put together a little bus that's pulled by a quad to get the kids to school. And they're here seeing other community members ask if they can use it.
Yeah. Exactly. Haley, what about yourself? Because when we're talking about solutions, right, and through a lived experience lens here, there was some stuff just mentioned, but did any of that strike you?
What resonated with me was the fact that everyone is talking about basically intersectionality, the identity of the individual, the applicant, the client, recipient. And if policies or the people in charge of distributing these services can't capture that pulse, it just, again, becomes like an overarching umbrella of a Band-Aid solution. So it might not necessarily be effective. It might not necessarily impact the actual root cause of the poverty or the problem in a specific community. So I like to try to explain to people what intersectionality kind of is. And when all these agencies, or the trending word is like, oh, we're trauma-informed lens and this lens and that lens. So when you go to like an optometrist and you sit in the chair and they have that thing in front of your face, the phoropter, I think it's called, and it's like, which one's better, 1 or 2? And then 3 and 4. So when you actually sit down with somebody and understand their intersectionality, or you understand just the intersectionality of the problem itself that they're facing or the community is facing, you have a pulse of that community. You can create a policy or a living document to then change and adapt when things either improve or decline. And that's kind of what's missing here, is like an up-to-date, not reaction, but like there has to be something more in time to address the in-time issues, not like some historic, siloed, encapsulated, one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, it's about, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like trying to understand folks who they are, like everything that makes up someone in a community and the specifics of that, listening to what the reality is, and then asking, well, what do you think the solutions are, and then helping folks come up with stuff that will be specific for an area.
That's right.
So that's Haley Poudan there with the Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group. I'm Adam Walsh. This is The Signal. Today on the show, we are digging into a recent child poverty report card. Also here with me in studio, Lindsay Hines, Manager, Community Vitality, Community Sector Council, NL. Nivi Mahendran, Project Officer, Impact Measurement and Engagement Choices for Youth, and Neria Aylward, Executive Director of the Jimmy Pratt Foundation. We'll go back to the phones here now because we've got another a friend of the show on the line, Stacey Hoff, Executive Director, Mokami Status of Women Council. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Adam. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for coming back on the show. It's always great to have your input and perspective here. So my question, if we're talking about this report, the report card, obviously lots of different perspectives in Labrador, but what are some of the perspectives out of Labrador that you can tell the rest of the province?
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to share. And I'll just preface by saying I'm located in Happy Valley Goose Bay, and I'm a settler here. So this is just a snapshot of, I think, like you said, just a much bigger conversation and other unique perspectives that exist in Labrador, particularly in Nunatsiavut on our north coast of Labrador. But yeah, all of the things that have been talked about on the show so far, we're seeing this in Labrador amplified. The cost of living is incredibly high. There is a lack of safe and affordable housing. There is an immense amount of food insecurity. And when you layer that with the impact of colonialism and the intergenerational trauma that exists in our community, the answers also become, I guess, much more layered. And I really appreciated what folks said around the necessary wraparound supports as a response to poverty, because that's certainly what we're seeing and what we're doing at Mokami.
And I've asked you similar questions before, right? Especially, back when we were in Happy Valley Goose Bay and visited Mokami. But like, for living this as staff and yourself, like, how is that for you folks? For what you're seeing and who and folks you're helping, and then just you living things day to day. Yeah,
it's hard. Some days you feel really defeated, but also I hear such stories of, resilience and people persisting, regardless of the challenges that they're facing. And so that makes me want to, get up and try harder. But one thing I know, Adam, you and I have talked about before is one thing that's challenging for me as the executive director is seeing my team facing some of the same challenges of the people that we support. And so that's certainly something that keeps me up at night, because that's when we get into the realm of talking about burnout and difficult to retain staff when, they have that extra weight of navigating those challenges themselves.
What do you think then for more solutions, looking for what could be an answer to certain, whether it's in Happy Valley Goose Bay or other parts of Labrador, for what could really be helpful in the regions up there?
Yeah, I think there's been so many solutions already noted today, more affordable and safe housing and investment in transportation and things like that. But I think just more broadly centering the stories and perspectives of the people who are facing poverty. They have the answers. They know what's working and what's not working. And so I think conversations like this are so important where we can amplify those voices.
Stacey Hoff, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Stacey Hoff, the Executive Director, Mokami Status of Women Council. We reached Stacey in Happy Valley Goose Bay, and I'll ask the same question every time. Every time someone comes on, I ask the same question afterwards. Right? Any thoughts from the folks in the room on what Stacey was saying?
Yeah, I have quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, go. All right, so there's 25 minutes left of the show, but go for it.
All right, buckle up. No. So, like Stacey said, having that lived experience at the table to influence decision-making is vital. So one of the things, when we did our consultation of the organizations, and just to be clear, we didn't consult lived expertise during this report, but we intend to properly next report. But we did consult with the organizations. And one of the questions that came up was like, well, what are you doing with this report and this information after the consultation? So it's parallel. So it's, you can consult all you like, but if you don't listen and use that information, and that's for whoever consults with people with lived experience, then they will stop talking. So if you're going to invite people to the table, you need to use the things that they've told you to make change. And I think we're here today, not just as 3 organizations and a person with lived expertise. We are amplifying and regurgitating the stories that we heard. So it's not about our 3 organizations. It's about the community sector. It's about the entire province, Newfoundland and Labrador, and what these organizations are doing and for the clients that they serve.
Yeah, it's not top down, right? It's you coming in, talking to different organizations, listening, compiling, and then putting that out, as opposed to in previous generations, years, or whatever, it would be like, well, here's what needs to be done. And you're like, well, no, that doesn't actually work.
And if you hear the information and then they don't make changes to mirror what the people who are the experts are saying, then that's a problem. And just to echo a statement that Stacey made, in the interest of public good, organizations need to be resourced to address the increasing needs of people and demand. We do community conversations across the province with CSCNL, and we hear a lot about burnout in the sector, especially post-pandemic. So we are seeing higher demand. We are seeing our staff turnover. I mean, tech is a really viable option now.
Yeah.
So people are leaving the sector and looking for ways that they then can provide for their families. So having these community collaboration systems is really key to making change. And we can't change poverty by ourselves. It needs collaboration across all levels of government and systems, community, and folks with lived experience.
It is really neat to have, we look at the folks here in this studio, and then you think of the report that was done and all the work together, and to hear people in communities kind of doing this type of work that's data-driven, analysis-driven, lived experience-driven, and to put that out for continuing a conversation, researching for solutions, and pushing towards government, whether it's community, local, provincial, federal, or whatever. I mean, that change has come more in recent years than it was there previously, I think, which is interesting. Any other thoughts to build on what we've heard?
I just wanted to add that I think we need to destigmatize it. Like, we talk about equity, we talk about inclusion and all these buzzwords, but when it comes to like social level, like we're all sitting around and talking, how do you have the verbiage to talk about poverty? What actions have you taken as an individual about poverty? And, just everyday citizens, everybody can make a change or contribute. But if you're going to stigmatize because of a newcomer, you're going to stigmatize because it's a youth, or you're going to stigmatize because it's an elder, and they should have familial support, but they don't. It's kind of like we have to actually identify how we're being consciously or subconsciously biased and how that's hurting the ability to create the social change. And that's just like in your domestic, behind closed doors conversations in private. Like, if everybody has these skewed views of poverty, there's not going to be any collaboration in a community. It's just all compartmentalized, and it's what's stopping. It's making everything stagnant because everyone has a personal opinion, and gossip may be based, or they think it's a statistic, it's too big of an elephant in the room to address. But it's very simple little things. Like I always say, it's not if, it's when. So when you're hungry, when you don't have any food, like, how do you want to be treated at the food bank?
Well, and the thing that I find, too, from these types of conversations, it goes from when we talk about poverty, and, well, for a lot of folks, that's another thing. It's not an us thing. That's those folks, them. And it's, wait a minute, if we're talking about community, Newfoundland and Labrador, then that's an us thing. And that's an every community, every family type of thing to look at.
If your kid's hungry, my kid's hungry. Right. And I'll treat your kid like my kid, and I'll feed them.
Any other thoughts?
I'd just like to pick up on what Haley just said, because it's one of the biggest, I think, takeaways from this report, and it's not new, it's just that this is our first time doing this. But one of the big takeaways is that overall, you can assume that 1 in 5, just 5 children in this province is living in poverty. And going beyond, I think we've heard a lot of stories over the past hour, and there are literally thousands more of what that actually means, right? There's a child behind every one of those numbers. And so it's something that I think we need to rejig our thinking, right? We can't just assume that children have what they need to succeed in our communities, because they don't. And that's what I think this report shows more than anything else. We look at newcomer children in Newfoundland and Labrador have twice the rate of poverty than they do in the rest of the country. That shows that when families are moving here, they don't have what they need to succeed. And that's, like Haley said, it's a collective responsibility.
And so on that, when we say 1 in 5, right, for children in the province, what is that reality for that child? And I know there's a big range on that, but if we're grouping in a 1 in 5, then what's the range of this reality?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Like for life, daily life, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure someone else is better equipped to.
Well, I guess what do the youth that you work with, what are the barriers they face?
Yes, I mean, if we're looking at the demographic of the children that are experiencing some of this poverty, it's often youth parents themselves. So it's kind of like a double. It's like young people living with children in poverty, and so they might not have access to appropriate health-related services. So a lot of the youth members that we see at Choices for Youth, they come into a clinic where doctors come into our center to be seen, and many of I should say all of our youth members that I see in our Youth Leadership Advisory Council have mentioned they don't have a family doctor and haven't had one for many years. So it's health, and then that leads into a bunch of other things that affect them and their children, adding to food security, adding to a lot of times housing.
Yeah. So there's a health issue, right, with doctors. There can be housing issues, food insecurity, right? So even if, looking at food insecurity rates in the province, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, if it could be kids who perhaps they're getting enough to eat, but it's their parents who are skipping meals or worrying about the road ahead when it comes to food. So this is some of that 1 in 5, the reality, right? So Haley, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, when I took my daughter to a youth leadership event in Ontario, one of the activities they did was tell me you're poor without telling me you're poor. So my daughter had said along the lines of eating craft dinner and trying to find a way to make it taste good. So some people's add ketchup. Well, ketchup has the sugar, so that's what makes it kind of addictive. For, an international person might be add hot sauce. Some people might be if you can afford bacon crumble or even the imitation bacon bits. Your meal, even though it's filling your belly, it's not nutritious. Yeah. So these children are going to school, even if their bellies are full, they're hungry. And then your mind can't think right. Your academics, your education, even basic elementary education is impacted severely. And then on top of that, is it culturally appropriate if it's someone of biracial or international origins? So now you're totally growing up in a whole different atmosphere, which is understandable, but your creature comfort food or, just the mental health tide, because food is identity, food is dignity, it's a cultural expression. You're now basically barred from part of your identity because you can't access the fresh produce or the international produce, and then you're trying to make do with what's here. But the settler society, the generational people experiencing poverty, it might be, it's okay to eat craft dinner. But then how many days in a row can you eat craft dinner? How many variations of flavor can you give it? And then you just give up.
Right. And this is, what folks are facing. Mm-hmm. So in this part of the show, when we move towards thinking about solutions, we've already heard some, right? Yeah. Right. We've heard about looking at transportation, region-specific solutions for transportation. And the provincial government is doing a fair bit. This is in the report. Is that enough? And where should things be going?
What we heard, again, just high level from community organizations, is that we almost need two kinds of intervention from the provincial government. Because I think we can start as like, do we need to take action on this? Yes. But what specifically do we need to do? We saw in 2020 that, there were a lot of cash transfers. I think that was a fantastic, in a way, like that's a data point we can look at. That yes, people had more money than they might have ever had before because of the cash transfers due to the pandemic. And that certainly helped a lot of people and took a lot of families out of poverty. But we also heard from community that that wasn't sufficient, that if there's not systems in place, I think that, what Sharon was just telling us about the taxis, that puts that in really stark perspective. Your CERB doesn't go very high. It doesn't go very far if you have to pay $150 on a taxi each way. It doesn't go very far when you're paying out of pocket for childcare. And that's where the provincial government needs to be focusing on public services that make life affordable, public services that families need. The big ones that we heard about were early childhood education. So whether it be family resource programs for folks who might not be in employment or childcare. We heard about transportation. We heard about the education system, K to 12, needing a lot more resources to support kids who have increasingly complex needs, to keep them in the system. So I'll leave it there. Sure.
Yeah. I think adding to that is the need for the expansion of a lot of programs that are seen locally, like in St. John's or St. John's Metro. A good example of this that the provincial government did recently is expansion of the Employment Stability Program, which was done in partnership with Choices for Youth and Stella Circle, which was done in St. John's as a pilot project, and the province announced this being a province-wide program now, which is amazing. But I think there also needs to be a focus of like, okay, employment opportunities, what are the wraparound supports would these, youth members need to kind of be successful in these programs?
Any solutions, thoughts?
I think that they need to move away from like the charity model and look more about empowerment of communities, of individuals, of, just grassroots initiatives even. And I've been following through my academics, like the politics in France. 2016, they have a food waste law, and, grocery stores are being held accountable to not throw away their food. They actually have to donate it or reduce it before its best before date. And they've recently, in 2024 January, have a compulsory compost law that's coming out. So instead of just also focusing like, oh, it's a local problem, there needs to be corporate and political accountability. Like, policies can be made provincially, and yes, it would take time, but why can't, as a province or as a federal government nation, do something about food waste so we can divert it from the landfill, feed the bellies who need it, and not just give bread? If I'm not sure if people are aware, but like they told people to stop feeding bread to geese because it made them like bloat up and didn't provide them nourishment. So if your solution in food banks or in all these policies is, just increase bread intake, again, where's the nutritional value? Bread has a time and place, but it's not a balanced diet to only be focusing and force feeding, basically, bread. So we need to have some sort of actual political, corporate accountability, sway, some sort of like push to make them do something.
Yeah, because food-wise, it's an affordability issue. We talk about food security and shoring up the systems of what we grow and where we grow it because we bring in so much food to Newfoundland and Labrador. But like all the grocery stores, they've got food, right? It's a food affordability question that we're talking about here when we talk about food insecurity.
Yeah, and it's a quality issue too sometimes. Like we've heard youth members say, we just don't buy produce because it's not going to be good enough to eat by the time it gets to, us in Stephenville, right? So it's like... Oh,
we did a food security show talking about the reality for Labrador, folks living on, whether it's the south coast or north coast, same type. It's like by the time it gets here, it sometimes goes right out into the garbage.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Quality. So, it's big. And when you have a report like this, with a report, we're talking, like, it's the same as, like, I guess, with the health accord. Like, these are big systemic change things that you folks are talking about, but from what the report's saying, this is what's required from what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, I think that we just need to start from a human rights perspective. What do people need to live a dignified life and to participate meaningfully in our communities? And then we figure out how to provide those things. Housing, whether it's housing, food, education, employment, if people want to work. But that's, I go back to Bernice Hancock, who's in Stephenville, and she's been a mentor to me, who always says concrete support in times of need. What do people need? How do we make sure that they get it, no matter where they're located, no matter what the barriers that they may face to accessing it are?
So how long did it take to put this thing together?
A year.
It's about a year,
Okay.
yeah.
It's a year.
So we're probably at the process of starting up for next year's report, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so go ahead.
And just to add on to your previous comment too about, where do we go from here in solution based? As we mentioned earlier, like poverty is such a complex systemic issue, and really that's I guess where the child poverty report card fits in, because we do need collaboration across government, across community organizations, and including those people with lived experience. And really working within the social determinants of health and how that intersects with poverty. A lot of organizations are doing some really great work in this area, but to put it all together and to really sit at the same table and to see what we can all do. We often hear implementing the dignity into these services and how important it is for people with lived experience and organizations alike. So, not lining up outside of a food bank, giving them a more discreet location where they can line up for their food. And we're really hearing that and trying to remove the stigma that's associated with poverty. And, that poverty is a full-time job.
Yeah.
So if somebody is experiencing poverty and you have a family with a child and they bring the child via the bus or walking, because sometimes they live close enough and they walk in the winter in Newfoundland, and then they have to go access a food bank. And one of the things through the conversations I do across the province, just from organic meetings, trying to see what organizations are struggling with and what their needs are. In Corner Brook, they have a bus. So I was like, you're gold. You must be like having a great time out here. So the bus doesn't operate when you think it would. So it doesn't operate in evenings and weekends. And maybe they've made changes in the last 6 months, but that was the last I heard.
Yeah.
Also, it's a bowl, and so it's really high on the sides. So if I was facing poverty, I'm going to be all day long going to get my food at the food bank, trying to get groceries, pick my child up from school. If they have an appointment, I'm on the bus again, don't have access to a taxi because it's really expensive. That's exhausting.
Yeah. Well, and from the Snowmageddon way back and through I think the Snowmageddon bit, I'll just talk for me and my job and understanding. This is when I started doing reporting and being like, oh yeah, transportation, right? Because think about the amount of privilege not to even understand that. But to do interviews about a food bank that started delivering, and then you're thinking of folks, well, because if you don't have a car, if you don't have access to public transit, how are you going to get to a food bank? And these which were initially established as Band-Aid solutions way back.
And we just heard from a person at a lived expertise group last week when the National Council on Poverty came to visit Newfoundland and Labrador. This lady had 5 children, and she was using the bus here in St. John's, and she's on a busy route. So if the bus is full, she had to wait in the winter.
And
with
it could
5
be
kids.
another however long depending on the bus route, right? And that could take a while.
Right. So it's just the reality, this, and the stigma. If people think that, oh, we have transportation here, we have a bus, and it opens up doors. But there's still challenges, and there's still a lot more work to do. So this is why this report was so important to these 3 organizations to take on.
So then we already heard about next year's report, right? So, but what do you build on? Like this, so part of this, right? You spend a year putting the report together, talking to different groups, getting all the stats, double checking everything, doing your media rounds. Then what? What happens next?
So we have had some conversations, and we are actually making a plan together. We do intend, we'd love to have more organizations at this level of the writing and the convening and really guiding where this goes next. So we have put out some feelers, and we have some folks, so we'll navigate how we can engage organizations across Newfoundland and Labrador, and also folks with lived expertise. Because again, the challenge, unfortunately, is funding. So there's no funding behind this report, and so the 3 organizations agreed to do it as most, full disclosure, to do it off the corner of their desk. And if we are to engage people with lived experience, we're very passionate about paying them for their time and their expertise.
Yeah, which is a big part of it.
So we have to address some challenges before we move forward.
Well, and it's which are always there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lindsay mentioned this before. I mean, this data is as much as the communities as it is, a report that we use Statistics Canada data. We want to show communities how they can use this data to apply for funding, to, show that, child poverty is bad. Stephenville, it's 31%. But we didn't want to say, oh, it's so bad and leave it there. Communities are doing so much. And so, they should be able to tell that story and say, we're doing the most we can, but we need a little help here.
There.
Yeah, this is the last time it'll be the three of us, I think, at this table, and we'd want to have more who are holding the pen. Next time, I would like to see, and all of us would like to see, a more diverse group that reflects the realities of poverty in this province, be it lived experience or regional representation. But yeah, I think, this was a start, but we're looking at what does this look like in 5 years? And I think you're going to see a really diverse table talking about poverty that maybe we've never seen in this province.
Haley, any thoughts from yourself?
I would like to hope to see that more organizations, nonprofit or otherwise, actually partner with youth for their youth initiatives. I actually started to get involved with this. My former professionalism was with homelessness initiatives, but now I switched when I moved here to youth initiatives and to empower the youth and to help them with their grant writing, because grants now, apparently youth is defined 30 and in some cases age 35. Now pandemic stole that part of my youth, but I'm reaching 40 and I can't qualify for this. So me and my daughter had partnered up, and it was hard for her initially reaching out to some organizations because they were so hesitant. And it's like, all you need to do is just agree to mentor, and we write the application, we do all the work, and then you got the benefit of whatever the product or the workshop was. So, if you want to empower the youth, we need to include them and mentor them. And if you don't have that capacity, is there any volunteers in the community with lived experience like myself? Because I have been a grant writer and I've also been like a grant reviewer. So I have both sides, and there's other people in the community who've also like applied for grants. So we need to all work together, and it shouldn't just be a local issue or an organization issue. It's an empowerment issue for the community.
I asked this same with when we do shows on housing and homelessness too. So for everyone, you go, you sit down here to do radio, you're talking about solutions and everything else, but then you look at the reality of where things are and tracking that over time. So when you come into these conversations, do you feel you're like, are you betting, like, are you an optimistic person for this and where we're going, or is it are you hedging that, or like where are you? Because it's awfully complicated and there's a lot of feelings around it.
With my mentors at work, it's often a balance of both. It's like you have to be, optimism keeps you going in terms of like, advocating for the best possible solution, and then you're grounded in reality and, this is what's possible with, government and asking for XYZ resources, but also how quick can this be done, right? Because it's obviously we want to take time and getting the right information and finding solutions that can actually have the appropriate effect in community, but do them in a timely manner. But we're kind of stuck in a crisis mode response, especially around poverty and all the things around it, food security, housing. So it's a balance.
Anyone else on that?
I found that I'm maybe overly optimistic and like too utopian thinking, but after receiving the grants with my daughter, and we established a free food pantry at Sharing Our Cultures Inc. for the BIPOC community, because that's something she identified, how it's so hard to access the food, it's so hard to afford the food, and we wanted to empower the youth to be able to come to their after school programs or their whatnot and be able to bring something home to their family. Feeding you and your family too was our slogan for it, and like we need to make food sharing visible. We need to make it acceptable. And, it's about having it in public spaces, whether it's, the municipalities, if it's community centers. There should be no shame about accessing food. And with just our little action of applying for that grant, we did make a difference. And we also applied for other grants for assist training for teens, and to get it. And like, we were so happy that we got it. And the people who received the benefit from it, they were also very thankful. And, anyone can do these things. We just need to word it properly on the paper. And again, that's all bureaucratic, I can't even say the word, and then administrative. So this is where we need to help each other to fill out these forms and to, have all these little coins to be thrown at us. But that's the foundation of our future.
It makes a difference. About 30 seconds left each for both of you, but Lindsay, yourself?
I am really hopeful. So I think creative solutions to some of these problems in the community sector, we're looking a lot at revenue diversification and social finance as a creative problem-solving tool, such as transportation in rural areas. So, and also, Haley makes me hopeful.
Right. Perfect. Neri, a final word for you today?
Gosh, it's just been an honor to work with this group and with everyone who was on the phone and who's been part of this report card. So thank you for having us.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning into this show today. Neria Aylward, Nivi Mahendran, Haley Poudan, and Lindsay Hines, thank you all so much. That is it for today's show. We're going to pop this one up on YouTube after, and there's a bunch of others that we put up. So go to CBCNL's YouTube page, and you can watch, right? So that's if you're thinking, wow, these folks sound great. Well, you should watch when you're, I don't know, cooking dinner this evening. It is a thing to be at. Trust me. Tomorrow on the show, artistic fraud. Well, the folks behind it. We're going to bring you the folks who bring big, edgy theater from the edge of a big country, and we're going to talk about who they are, what they've done, and the impact they have on communities. So if you want to get in touch with the impact theater has had on your community, the signal at cbc.ca. We'll catch you tomorrow.